Variables are used to store data in Java. Before we can begin using variables, we need to understand what they are and how to name them, because naming rules are very important in programming. So let's get started with this lesson. A variable is a name for a memory location. Memory locations are normally named using hexadecimal values, and we don't want to have to try to remember hexadecimal values. We won't be able to remember them. So instead we provide a name. A variable always has a type. When we create a variable, we always associate a type with it to tell the compiler what type of data can be stored in that variable. So that's another rule about variables. When we store data in a variable, we call that a value. That's not a technical term, but I'll talk constantly about a variable's value. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking about the piece of data that is stored in that variable. As far as the naming rules for variables go, the first rule is that a variable name must start with a letter. It cannot start with a symbol or a number. It has to be a letter. After the initial letter, a variable name may contain letters, numbers, and the underscore character. But notice that we don't include symbols like the $sign or the %sign. So variable names are limited to a starting letter followed by any combination of letters, numbers, and the underscore character. Some examples of variable names are salary, name3, first underscore name, and last name, where the second part of the variable name is capitalized. We use that style called camel casing instead of underscores to make it a little bit easier to type the variable name. Some examples of bad variable names are 3name. That doesn't work because it starts with a number, and first underscore name. Finally, let's look at some other rules about variable names. There's no real limit to their length, although any name should be as short as possible, and the name should be meaningful. In other words, if you're storing someone's first name in a variable, first name makes sense, or even F name makes sense, whereas F by itself, just the letter F, probably doesn't make sense because it's not easy to discern what that variable is trying to store just by the single letter F. There are situations where we use single letter variables, but not for meaningful data such as a name. And the last rule is variables should always begin with lowercase letters. That's because in Java, a class name always begins with a capital letter. So we might have a class called name. If we tried to use a variable with capital N-A-M-E, then we'd have a conflict. So restrict your variables to lowercase letters and reserve uppercase letters at the beginning of names for classes. And that's really all the rules we need to discuss for variables. So now we're ready to move to the next lesson where we learn how to declare variables for use in our program.